Here is Cesar Roversi playing, opening our event. Cesar is with you.
Very much. It's a great pleasure to participate in this room. I will play a Brazilian song by Pixinguinha, a great saxophone player from Brazil, and it's a very no music called Carinhoso.
Wow, amazing, Cesar. For those of
Thank
you
you.
joining us now, this is Cesar Roversi, Brazilian saxophonist. He started playing music when he was 7 years of age and hasn't stopped since then. That was a beautiful Carinhoso by Pixinguinha's version that you presented to us, Cesar. Muito obrigada.
Obrigado. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Cesar has a solo album. We'll put the link for you in our website and social media channels. Cesar, among his many accomplishments, he was part of Hermeto Pascoal and Big Band CD. And in 2018, they were awarded with a Grammy as the Latin Jazz CD of the Year. Congratulations, Cesar. Such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to meet too.
Parabéns.
Obrigado.
Tchau.
Tchau, tchau.
Welcome to BayBrazil Annual Conference. For those of you joining us for the first time, we have many actually first timers. Most of you know that we used to have this conference in presence, live, face-to-face interactions. However, this year we are doing online, and we miss seeing you and having those interactions, but it's been great that more of you are accessing us both live right now through Zoom and Facebook. So since we have many first timers, I wanna tell you a little bit about BayBrazil, because this year, this conference is very important to us because we are celebrating our 10-year anniversary. And I wanna tell you a little bit about what we're doing, the results of our work in this past year, so you can have a sense of our community. So let me share my screen here with you. So BayBrazil, at BayBrazil, we believe in the power of a conversation. We are setting up conversations by connecting our community that was inexistent up to 2010. We really started from ground up to build the Brazilian American tech community in Silicon Valley, which is today composed of over 15,000 people. We've helped in these past years over 50 companies, both small businesses, startups, as well as large corporations, helping them with benchmark, with connections, both in Silicon Valley and Brazil. We also have organized over 150 events, and we presenting exclusive and in-depth discussions to promote not only information sharing among our tech hub, but also interactions that have been the forte of our community, of our organization. And we've been fostering entrepreneurship by facilitating the access of startups to tech players, potential partners, investors, and mentors. So the way we do this is a lot of time is by promoting opportunities to our community to engage with their peers, both in Silicon Valley and Brazil. This is the pictures you are seeing is part of our program last year that we did with our partners and had meetings and conversations in various tech companies, investment firms, and of course, some R&R as well. This is in 2018. we've been hosting both Brazilians and Americans from all over the country to engage in these exclusive conversations for this past 10 years. And the way we do that is by organizing events. We have, of course, private meetings, but we have also public events that have been helping us to really build the community from ground up. We believe in the power of a conversation. We believe that by bringing people together, we can add inspiration among our community. And so here I want to show you that, this is the edition number 9 of our annual conference. And we started this conference at Stanford University back in 2012. And at that point, we had about 180 people attending. In the following year, we had over 200. And in the last editions, we had over 300 people attending, and also many players and innovators sharing their views on a variety of topics. You see here the co-founder of WhatsApp, Brian Acton, and you see also here in 2015, Frederico Trajano, CEO of Magazine Luiza. You see here Leila Velez of Beleza Natural. This was our conference at Google in 2016, again for over 300 people. In 2017, Mike Krieger, co-founder of Instagram, joined among other leaders. And we had our number 7 edition at LinkedIn. And last year, we were at SRI Menlo Park. And many of you that are joining us today were there. So we are also organizing workshops to help startups to connect with mentors, with potential partners. We have been interviewing dozens of leaders, both Brazilian leaders as well as American leaders, to add inspiration and information to our community. You see our latest interviewee was Nina Silva, co-founder of Movimento Black Money. The organization is supporting entrepreneurship and education in Brazilian Black community. Our conference this year has been free of charge, but we are encouraging donations to Nina's organization and help foster entrepreneurship among the Black community of Brazil. We are supported by wonderful partners who not only are engaging in our community and helping our community to grow, but we also work doing certain projects with our partners that advance tech innovation in both regions. Our team has been amazing. We have a board of advisors that have been absolutely supportive to me and to our entire team. So I'm very happy to have one of them here today joining this event to discuss logistics. And with that, I welcome back to our annual conference, Antoine Colaço, partner of Valor Capital Group. Hi, Antoine. So good to have you back. And so we've had discussions in this past week about the future of real estate, the role of design in tech innovation, the US-Brazil innovation ecosystems. So today we are having our leadership helping us to understand the logistics sectors, thank you for being with us and for helping us to digging into this theme.
Well, Margarise, thank you for having me. And first and foremost, I think we all need to thank you for all your efforts you've made over the last decade. I don't think the selflessness that you've had towards creating BayBrazil has made us all better. And I think we all you deserve a great round of applause from all of us, whether it be virtual and hopefully in person soon. But I think you've done a phenomenal job of bringing Silicon Valley, connecting it with Brazil, which I think a lot of people have found value in, and I think we all owe you a debt of gratitude for that. So I want to just say thank you to you for all your efforts, first and foremost.
Obrigada.
Secondly, I just want to make sure, I know people are watching this through Zoom and through Facebook. We will have opportunities for people to ask questions, so please feel free to use the comment section in Zoom and on Facebook. Margarise and I will be trying to monitor those and bring those up in the conversations. And I also want to make sure, I know we're in an unprecedented time now with COVID. I know a lot of people have been affected. I know people who have been affected personally. And I think I just want to send out my wishes to everybody. I hope everyone is staying safe. Our two countries in the US and Brazil have been affected the most in this world, which is unfortunate. But I just want to send my feelings to everybody. I hope you're staying safe. I hope your families are staying safe. I know people are going through personal and economic hardships, and I know it's not easy. So I just want to make sure that we recognize that up front in this time.
Thank you.
So I have a brief presentation that I'm going to give about logistics, and then I will definitely pass it on to the experts who we have on our panel who are much better suited to speak about this topic, and just consider me kind of the guide to get us the right questions out there and get their ideas out. So I'll start with my deck, and Margarise, if you can just confirm when I'm going to screen share right now. Can you see my screen?
Not yet, Antoine.
Okay, let me see.
It's right on the bottom, right? Oh, now I think yes, you okay now?
Great, perfect. Well, thank you. So I'm just going to, as I said, hopefully give a very short kind of overview of what we're going to discuss, and then let the experts really talk. So I want to just start by kind of discussing and defining what we're going to be discussing today. So if you think about logistics, what are we really talking about? And really that's the process of coordinating and moving resources, whether that's people, materials, inventory, or equipment from one location to another, right? I mean, that's at a high level what we're discussing. And to get a sense of that, the magnitude of that, in the US, logistics costs are around 8% of GDP, and in Brazil, they're about 12% of GDP. And in the past, what you've seen is companies have traditionally outsourced these logistics operations like freight, warehousing, and delivery to inefficient, siloed, and relationship-based contracts. Now what you've got is a change that we're seeing that's actually evolving very quickly, where you're seeing emerging supply chain platforms which are providing digitized solutions that are providing increased connectivity, visibility, predictive analysis, which improve the speed, reduce the cost, and enhance service outcomes. And we see this as a long-term secular shift in supply chain infrastructure that's going to reshape the industry for the next several years. And as I said, it's a massive industry that we are affecting here. So these are the three areas of focus that we're going to talk about today. One is supply chain management, parcel delivery, and freight. And as I mentioned, we've got experts in each of these areas, and I'm just going to provide an overlying context for it, and then allow them to really talk about it. So if we, typically in the past, we've oftentimes, I think for those of us who are not as well versed, we use logistics and supply chain management as kind of the same, and we use them interchangeably. I think they really talk about two different aspects. If you think about supply chain management, that's the full handling of the entire production flow of a good or service. So it starts with the raw materials all the way to the final product to the consumer. And in order to do this, supply chain companies will create a network of suppliers, or kind of the links in the chain, and that move the product along from the suppliers, the raw material, all the way to the organizations that deal with the end user. When we talk about parcel delivery, I think that's something that we're all are very comfortable with and know. It's a small package, can be either an envelope size, can be a box size, and can either be self-packaged or the carrier will package it for us. And then when we talk about freight shipping, that's moving commodities, goods, cargo by land, sea, or air. And really, if you think about that, the biggest means of transport are typically trucks, railroad cars, or large ships and shipping containers. So starting with supply chain management, traditionally what you've seen is that supply chains have consisted of kind of linear processes where raw materials are procured by the suppliers, they're then sold to the producers, manufactured into finished goods, and sent to distributors to be packaged and delivered for the final consumer. The more efficiently you can get those raw products and purchase them, transport them, and store them until use, that increases your profitability. So coordinating those resources to allow that for timely delivery and the best use of those materials can make or break a company. As we'll discuss later, supply chains are now under pressure like they've never been before. Consumers are now expecting faster time to market, reduced defect rates, and more customization of products. So there's a lot of complex demands that are needing to be met. And this is being driven by increased flexibility and visibility, so you can have faster response times. There's global demand for cost reduction. There are centralized networks to provide that are needed to provide increased data visibility and transparency. And then you need to also be ready for rapid technology transitions. And so to do this, it's really necessary to create these, what we think about as customer-focused supply chains that are much faster and more agile. And this 27 supply 50 times more data than just 5 years earlier. So what you're seeing is this proliferation of data and the need to be able to be flexible in their supply chain to meet your customers' needs. So if we look at kind of legacy versus current, and this is a very simplified description here, but enterprise supply chain management software traditionally operated in between the major steps there. And so it was a much more of a linear sort of process. Separate systems were often used between adjacent parties in the value chain to kind of exchange information such as orders and returns, but they were not integrated and to other processes in the supply chain. And so data exchange was much more difficult. So now in the past, while supply chains were focused on availability, movement, and the cost of physical assets, today's supply chains are really much more focused on management of data, services, and products bundled into solutions. So it's much more about the whole chain and the information in the chain than just where and when you're going to get the product. And so these new supply chains really affect service quality, delivery, cost, customer experience, and ultimately profitability. So now if we talk about parcel delivery, just to kind of put out the definition, and you'll see this in some of our speakers today, I think we all are very used to parcel delivery. And that has been typically the purview of postal services in the past. And now we're seeing a whole nother set of companies such as Loggi, who Greg will be speaking about later today, where smaller packages are traveling locally for delivery. When you talk about freight, then you have two major categories. There are many others as well, but if you think about freight, it's typically larger loads that are going longer distances. And so there's what's called less than truckload, LTL. There's full truckload, FTL. There's intermodal, partial truckload, and expedited as well. But as the titles would make you think, less than truckload is a shipment that won't fit a full truck, and full truckload involves the full bulk or pallet loads that are large enough to justify an entire semi-trailer, and typically they're above 5,000 pounds or so in their shipment. And we'll have both Eddie and Fede will be discussing those when in their panel discussion. So talking more specifically about parcel delivery, what's interesting is this has been taking off. I think we've all experienced this ourselves, right? Today, 12 to 15% of all purchases in the US are made from people's homes now. and Amazon same day service, while it's only a few years old, excuse me, is up to 5% of their deliveries. And by 2025, they're expecting that could be as high as 15%. So there's an increased expectation from customers for fast and free delivery. And that pushes a lot of pressure on services to provide those services. And that's happened in the US, and Brazil is no different, as we've seen. Explosion of e-commerce, which recently has also been fueled by COVID, and a growing percentage of the Brazilian middle and upper class are increasingly expecting things to be delivered to them at home and as fast as possible. What is interesting in Brazil is still we're a little bit behind what's happening in the US, in that 50% of our e-commerce is still transported through Correios. Now that has come down from 75% over the last couple of years, but it's still, Correios, as we know, is known for being expensive, being unpredictable, and having long delivery times and inconsistent delivery times. The Northeast versus Sao Paulo, you have very different kind of times to get your packages. And so in Brazil, I think e-commerce sellers face considerable challenges streamlining their logistics to adapt to the demand of digital commerce, i.e. being fast delivery and efficient operations. And sometimes they will face lower sales conversion because of inefficient distribution. And I think what this has done is, and you'll hear more about this, is that this has opened up the opportunity in Brazil for kind of efficient delivery companies, innovation around the first and last mile service, and it's we're seeing large companies being built in this space. One interesting thing about this, which is on a more macro sense, is while delivery becomes very convenient for people and for businesses, it actually does add in some ways to traffic congestion and demands new models. And so you're seeing new models come up, such as smaller fulfillment centers in urban areas, smart lockers, and even the discussion around autonomous delivery vehicles. So I think there's going to be a lot of innovation in this sector just by necessity as people's demands increase. So if you look at kind of legacy versus the current, I think there's a number of trends that are really driving this. As I discussed, there's the growing consumer preference for on-demand or same-day delivery. There's the failure of current delivery options to have mobile experiences, which everyone expects now. Gig economy workforce is increasing, which increases the labor supply. You've got retailer demand for delivery as a service. And you've also got the potential, as I mentioned, for automated or autonomous delivery. On the supply side, and we can talk about this further in our panel, there is this outsourced fulfillment model, and it works well in South America because wages are cheaper than in the US. So these are more profitable and allows more people to engage in the workforce in that nature. And one example of that is in Brazil, we have nearly 1 million motorboys, and 200,000 of those are in Sao Paulo, which just gives a sense of the scale that we're experiencing in this space. And then a little more detail on the freight logistics that we discussed earlier. Shippers, brokers, and carriers have in the past all suffered from extreme lack of modern technology. The entire system was really run on 15-year-old software. No data was captured. Software packages couldn't communicate with each other. And mainly it was really run by the interaction of people talking to each other and keeping spreadsheets. Information asymmetry ran rampant in the market. And now you can see that there's massive advantages through data intelligence, especially created by online marketplaces. And if you look at Brazil's market alone, it's $105 billion full truckload. This is only the full truckload market in Brazil. And it's highly inefficient, where you've got large trucks operating with 60% excess capacity, highly fragmented. And you see that on average, each carrier owns only 2.8 trucks, and 98% of the trucks are owned by carriers with fewer than 5 trucks. So it's a highly fragmented supply of trucks in Brazil. Road freight platforms. Now, if you kind of look at the more digitized version, they enhance the pricing transparency, professionalize and digitize, this shipper carrier exchange. Excuse me. And they focus on really data to leverage it to get over the mass inefficiencies that are already created in the systems and to reduce kind of empty runs of trucks. And again, just to put a point on the kind of the size of the market also, Brazil is larger than the continental US. It's the 5th largest country by area, and 75% of the freight in Brazil is moved by owner-operators versus only 11% of the US. So there's also massive excess capacity in Brazil. So there's a huge opportunity for optimization in the market. And the interesting thing, and I think Fede may be able to talk about this also, is there's been an interesting shift in the market also because Brazilian truckers now have smartphones in their hands, which they didn't have only a few years ago. And now they say that there's an analysis done in 2019 where it says that 87.8% of truck drivers now either use a notebook, smartphone, or tablet. Now, their first primary reason for that is social media or professional issues or reading the news and things like that, or payments, but they have it in their hands, and that is a very powerful thing to utilize. And that's why you can see businesses like CargoX really growing rapidly with that technology in the truckers' hands. So if you're talking about the legacy model, as we discussed, highly inefficient. Shippers would typically call multiple brokers in thousands of online marketplaces to see carriers available. We even heard early on that truckers would go to truck stops and look for little pieces of paper in the window to see if they could find something to haul back after they've dropped off their load. Large shippers lacked access to small carriers. There was a lot of load theft. Driver safety was an issue. And so and truckers didn't have opportunities for financing, and they had high levels of default. So that was the kind of the situation that we saw several years ago. Now what you're seeing is digital brokerage platforms are really automating the process to connect supply chain intermediaries and connecting the shippers to freight companies. They're disrupting the traditional kind of relationship-based approach that has existed in the past, which was, again, typically was using manual processing and faxing of documents. There's increased price transparency now and reduction of costs. And especially with labor accounting for a large portion of the freight broker's expenses, digital solutions, which can automate that, can save a lot of money and pass on some of those savings to the consumers. So that was hopefully just gave you a little bit of background on kind of the segments that we're going to discuss today. And now just to give high level some of the ideas of what could come in the future and what we're thinking about. We really think that technology is really changing every aspect of how logistics companies operate. Digitalization is going to be a prerequisite for success. And we think that the winners are going to be those who understand how to exploit the full range of technologies. And if you don't, there's a risk of obsolescence. So here, I'll leave you with kind of 6 thoughts about areas where this could go as far as kind of logistics and technology and how they could impact. If you think about one area is autonomous vehicles. So we've heard a lot about this. There's, we don't know the timing of this, but this could change the cost structure for trucking. Operating costs could decline by about 45%, which would save, just in the US for hire trucking industry could save about $85 to $125 billion with autonomous vehicles. They could provide a supporting role into automating logistic processes, and could also help drivers avoid potential dangers and also calculate the safest maneuvers in tough driving conditions. Internet of Things is another area. So industrial Internet of Things has been growing in warehousing and so on, and it increases the ability to manage your warehouse, also how to interact with customers and the supply chain. And what it allows it to do is also follow to have more automated traceability and predictability, lower costs, and create these kind of smart warehousing solutions. And we're seeing new entrants kind of coming into the space quite actively. It's built on big data, cloud, connected platform technologies, and give customers seamless experience that they expect already as a consumer, they can expect on the enterprise level as well. Big data is another area that we're looking at. There's almost no other there's very few other sectors that have as much data, and where the interest in following that data is important. And now you've got access to it that you didn't have before. So machine learning and artificial intelligence techniques can truly kind of deliver dynamic routing. You can increase the customer experience, operational efficiencies, and greater inventory management and visibility, and also even things like predictive maintenance within warehousing and so on. Blockchain is one that you hear about quite a bit. There are thoughts about blockchain in this space as well. Audit trail which would create audit trail for transaction through smart contracts, could increase transparency, accountability, and efficiency of current supply chains, and provide end-to-end visibility of the process, and find, one of the interesting things is, for example, to be able to trace, so traceability. And so, for example, if there are foodborne illnesses, to be able to trace back where that came from and quickly know where in the supply chain you need to kind of go back and modify. Another area is drones and robots. Drones are capable of taking inventory of logistics warehouses, transporting goods by air, or even carrying out security tasks. And so in the US, you've already seen some companies talking about this. Amazon is at the top of mind. So companies have already started looking at drones as cost-effective and environmentally friendly answers to delivery. UPS has already established itself as a leader in unmanned aerial vehicle delivery, and they became America's first FAA-approved nationwide drone airline. And the last topic I'll bring up here is sustainability. I think it's on the top of a number of people's minds. Carbon dioxide emissions from freight transportation account for 30% of all transportation-related carbon emissions from fuel combustion. So, every mile of transportation represents more emissions into the atmosphere. And so reducing those miles driven can make a very big impact into our environment. And so I think that there are a number of things that could be looked at there. Carbon emission offsets, routing waste reduction, fuel efficiencies, and order management as well. So I hope that gives just a little bit of a taste of the market and an overview. And again, as I said, please questions on wherever you're watching this, either or through Facebook. And I'm going to invite our panelists now, our first set of panelists now, Hannah and Greg, to join me and have our first conversation. So I want to thank both Hannah and Greg for joining us today and imparting their wisdom on us. And I will give brief backgrounds on them. They have very impressive resumes, so I will try to capture it, but then I will also let them introduce themselves as well. So Hannah Kain is president and CEO of ALOM, a global supply chain company she founded in 1997 with headquarters in Fremont, California. ALOM operates out of 19 locations to support its Fortune 500 customers in the technology, automotive, medical, financial, and utility energy sectors, with brand enhancing supply chain management services and solutions. Hannah was born in Denmark and immigrated to the US in 1990. She taught at Copenhagen Business School and holds 3 university degrees. She has extensive international management experience, membership, and involvement in numerous governmental and education industries and business groups, and has received numerous awards. So thank you, Hannah, for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
It's absolutely my pleasure. Thank you.
And Greg Velasco is COO of Loggi. And as many people know, Loggi is connecting Brazil using technology to reinvent logistics with a fast, cost-efficient, and reliable network across e-commerce, wholesale food delivery, and courier services. Greg led Loggi's Series D and E unicorn rounds as CFO before moving into the COO role. Previously, he worked in trading, structuring, and management consulting, and even wrote a book on structuring family offices. He holds a master's degree in economics and statistics from Bocconi University in Italy, and is a CFA charter holder. So Greg, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Antoine.
So I'll let Hannah, if you can go first and just give a little bit more. I've just given a very high level background, but please talk about your experience and just generally your experience in the logistics space and so on, and a little bit more about your background. And then Greg, I'll ask the same of you, please.
Wonderful. So thank you. And first of all, I need to say congratulations to BayBrazil and Margarise for doing a fantastic job. And thank you for congratulations with the 10 years. And thank you so much for everything you do for the greater community. and of course for having me on this panel. So,
And welcome for the first time in our conference, Hannah. I must say also that Hannah has been a wonderful supporter, not only to me personally, but to many other women entrepreneurs. I really appreciate that, Hannah.
Thank you, and everybody needs to pay it forward. So I started ALOM in 1997, and today is a very different world. And so rather than looking back, I think what I want to do is talk a little bit about how supply chain generally works right now and how I see it and how it ties into technology. So Antoine gave a fantastic overview over logistics. ALOM is in a much wider supply chain space. So we do everything from procuring inventory, working with suppliers, collaborating, to doing the warehousing, inventory management, production. We do have facilities, 19 locations globally, as Antoine was mentioning in the introduction. And then we do the entire distribution. So we are really vertically integrated, doing everything for our customers, though a lot of our customers pick services out of there. And so when we work with a customer, they really entrust their product to us. So we produce a product. And we work with the physical supply chain, and most people, when they think about supply chain, they think about the physical aspects. And the physical aspects certainly are very important, because in the end, the product needs to be produced and it needs to get out in the consumer's hands. But what is equally important and interesting is the entire data supply chain. How does information flow? And how can you keep that information synchronized with the physical flow and have the data flow enhance the physical flow, such that you can make more sustainable supply chains, you can have the resiliency and the agility that you need in order to meet customer demands. And then finally, there's the financial supply chain. And that has always also been a very overlooked part of the supply chain. So as you're looking at the physical and the data and the financial, it really needs to go hand in hand. And decisions need to be made that encompass all of the supply chains. And you need to take everything into account in each of the supply chains. So as an example, if you move a piece of good from the US to Brazil, well, you have border crossings, and the border crossings have a financial aspect. You have currencies, it's got a financial aspect. You maybe have delays in customs that has a financial aspect. It's got a data aspect. You want to see where product is and how it flows through. So lots of different things to take into account. We manage all three aspects for our customers. So then the other thing that I think has changed a lot, and I've really seen a big step up in this change this year, is everything needs to be done with respect for the overall social responsibility. And so that is not just sustainability, it's also how the people treated who are in the supply chain. Who do you let into the supply chain? How do you treat people? Are you doing it the right way? Are you not doing it the right way? Do you look the other way if somebody is using child labor, if you get it 1 cent cheaper? Those type of things are getting really important here, where we right now are in my experience, a fantastic transition where people are making a lot of decisions based on trust. And the brand trust is much more important than it's ever been. I was looking at a number of statistics, and I could have brought them, but it's really amazing with that change. So that's kind of the framework we work inside, and I can certainly talk more about that, but I want to make sure that we've got time to talk about some of the other aspects.
Can I ask one quick question based on what you just said? Do you find your customers now asking for that transparency, and that when you're talking about lack of child labor or kind of the social aspect of it, are you finding your customers being more proactive and asking you for that right now?
We work with large corporations, and they are typically running a little bit behind them. They ask for compared to what's needed in the marketplace, right?
So do you find yourself pushing that then?
We work with very brand conscious companies.
Yeah.
And so we already had those conversations, and we also have conversations with our suppliers, right? And so we of course use all the standard methods for qualifying that what a supplier does, and making sure that we have social responsibility throughout the supply chain. However, in the end, there's also an aspect that's called, are you aligned about the values?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where we work both with our suppliers and our customers. And so when you see a lot of corporations these days said, oh, we are in a crisis, a pandemic. Oh, by the way, all our suppliers now are being paid in 120 days. Right? That has not happened to us. That's not the type of segment we are working with.
Yeah.
We're working with people who care about everybody else in the supply chain. And that's part of what we also do with our suppliers, is work closely with them and collaborate. So it's a different way of thinking. And so we've not had them show up with new forms or things we had to do. But I am concerned about it in a pandemic world. I'll just add that really fast, because part of what happened in the pre-pandemic world is corporations would show up at their suppliers overseas, mm-hmm. and do a physical audit and see what was what went on the production line, right? And today, you have got to rely on what you can see via Zoom or whatever other platform you do, and which paper people fill in. And, I think all bets are off for a lot of supply chains.
Yeah. Well, thank you. So I'll come back to you with some other questions, but Greg, please, would love for you to also give you a little bit more background on yourself and Loggi and how you guys are seeing the market.
Oh, perfect. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation, and congratulations to BayBrazil for its 10 years. So Loggi is a tech company, tackling the express parcel delivery space. Our vision is to connect Brazil, enabling shippers to be able to reach any parts of Brazil in a fast and cost-efficient way. Since we've started the company in 2013, so in less than 7 years, we've already have physical presence in 15 of the 27 states of Brazil. And by the end of the year, we'll be operating 7 cross-docking facilities, 105 urban mini hubs in many Brazilian cities, and over 300 franchises, and basically doing that, reaching about 75% of the Brazilian population. I think something to connect with what Anna was saying is, I think something very interesting from our perspective is, we started as a tech company with basically a blank sheet of paper. So we had the opportunity basically to really create the company thinking about all the information flow, all the data flow from the ground up, to make sure that basically we were enabled to be able to not only monitor the operations, but take the right decisions, as we were growing the company, as we were growing basically our parcel network. So today, Loggi really leverages technology not only to be able to be faster and cost efficient, but basically we benefit substantially from all the flywheels that you get in logistics, which, you know, with higher volumes, you get higher density. From higher density, you're able to optimize a lot of costs. You're able to go faster. You're able to, you know, differentiate your products and really, you know, differentiate yourself in the market. So this is really how we leverage the technology, you know, at every step. And last but not least, I think Anna spoke quite a lot about the importance of relationship and social responsibility in the market. You know, we're a crowdsourced platform for our last mile, and we also crowdsource a lot of our mid-mile with mid-sized transportation companies. And obviously doing the right thing, especially in a situation like COVID, making sure that people are safe, that people getting paid is a huge social responsibility in making sure that basically you're offering the right opportunities to people and not just taking advantage of the situation. And this is something that we take on very responsibly with a lot of importance.
Great. So you both touched on the COVID subject, which is obviously, you know, first and foremost in everyone's minds these days. So Hannah, let me ask you a question around that. You know, the pandemic must be kind of disrupting chains and the supply of demand, like we're seeing even in the US, things as food. You know, typically restaurants would be needing a lot of food. Now you don't need it at the restaurants, but you need it in people's hands because, you know, people are going hungry. I assume freight rates are all over the place. How do you deal with that? How does a company deal with it, with operations in multiple countries? How do you deal with this new reality right now?
Thank you for the question, Antoine. So first of all, I think staying focused is really important, right? As a leader, you need to stay focused, but you prepare for these type of situations. So yes, this is a more pervasive disruption that we've ever seen. It's more pervasive in the sense that this is global. It used to, if you have a flood or a hurricane, it's a very local defined event. And it's time-wise, it's of course much more spread out. So it's much more pervasive. And so you prepare for this by having a very agile, resilient supply chain. And so what we have done over time as humanity is making our supply chains very, very complex and very dependent on technology. And as long as the technology works and everything goes on track, we're good. And we can start optimizing. And a lot of the efforts have been put into how do we optimize the supply chain. What's important right now is more agility and resilience, because what really happened, and you touched perfectly on this, is the demand shift really has been the number one change, right? A lot of people are looking at the supply side, and I'm not saying the supply side is not important and problems with getting PPE from China, etc. Of course that's important, but seen from a supply chain standpoint, what really happened was a shift both in how people were buying. And that's why if we talk technology, right, I think that anything that's consumer sensing is going to be such a big deal going forward in the future. So when we look at what really happened out in where the consumer is buying, it was a shift of what are we buying? So we stopped buying 4-inch Christian Louboutin shoes because we were not going to any restaurants, right, where we could show them off.
I know I did. I stopped right away, yes.
Yeah, Las Vegas was closed, right? So a lot of the luxury goods we stopped buying. Food purchases, on the other hand, went up. And anything, of course, for our home offices, right? We all needed to all of a sudden set up a home office that we were really comfortable working in and those type of things. So there was definitely a shift in what we were buying. Then there's what was the purpose of what we were buying, or what was the situation we were buying it in, and
But Hannah,
I did a lot of toilet tissue discussions, right? Where,
exactly.
you know, toilet tissue was sent out to hotels, and now hotels didn't need them. And so, A, it was stuck in that channel. B, the type of rolls were for another size.
That's
and you cannot just shift production overnight. And so that was another thing. And then there was, okay, what are the channels you're buying from, right? So people used to go out to a mall and buy it. And now the malls were closed and people went on Amazon. They actually went on the web, but 49% of the purchases on the web is through Amazon, right? So they went on and bought it online. So we saw this huge spike in internet purchases, which is going to, you know, I look at it, we had pre-pandemic, we have crisis pandemic, we have trans-pandemic, which is where we are starting now, and then we've got post-pandemic. And you know, I think the internet purchases are going to stay up even post-pandemic, and there are lots of things we advise around that. But certainly having the agility and the flexibility and being really fast at changing. And so what I see is people who use technology well, people who have contingency plans and are prepared, people who know and collaborate well with their suppliers. They are the ones who have been really doing well in this environment.
Yep. And Greg, so that, I mean, I think obviously this has affected your business dramatically, I imagine, as well, in many ways. Again, the demand discussion that we've been having affects you on a daily basis as well. And, you know, but there's also this issue around wariness of peer-to-peer contact. And how do you think about Loggi's role kind of working within that sharing economy, facilitating these interactions between people and companies? You know, how have your operations really been affected by this? And how do you think about it? You touched on it briefly before, but, you know, if you can expand on that a little bit. And I think this explosion of demand in different ways must affect all of us in logistics, right?
Oh, perfect. So effectively, Loggi has, you know, a very central role into enabling people to stay at home. And what we've seen on the domain side of the logistics side is just a huge boom in terms of volumes. We well exceeded, you know, our peak volumes that we had done at the previous Black Friday season. And they basically, this peak volume came over, you know, 2.5-3 weeks period, whereby nobody had time to plan. And in circumstances where basically your workforce were scared and where authorities were, you know, still trying to understand which businesses could stay open or not. You know, I think for any companies in the logistics space, you know, you always have contingency plans. You have your plan A, your plan B, your plan C. In logistics, you deal with your contingencies all the time at every level because of the complexity of a logistics network and all the moving pieces. So you learn to plan yourself in advance for very adverse scenarios. And that is what we did at Loggi. We started early in February, already trying to understand, you know, how could basically lockdown impact us, both on volume, both on capacity, what type of protection we should provide to our employees, to our crowdsourced delivery fleets as well, and all the processes that we would have to change in basically a COVID world. So when actually the shutdown started in Brazil, which is towards mid-March, we were actually, you know, we had done most of the procurement of PPE equipments. We had already, you know, trained people into all the change in processes that needed to happen. So like physical distancing into our, you know, last mile mini hubs, making sure delivery drivers would stay at right distance, a big educational parts as well. And we implemented very early on, you know, audit processes, so very standard, but leverage technology for that audit process at every step to make sure that you know, those new protection processes, safety processes were happening. So we did more than 4,000 audits since the beginning of COVID. And I think one of the very interesting results is that not only volumes grew substantially, but you know, boomed basically, but basically our service quality has been maintained. Our SLOs have been maintained throughout, except like in very long distance where we lost air transfer as a capacity, but basically others SLOs were maintained. And last but not least, but the parts of our workforce where we had more COVID cases were the part that stayed that is working from home. So I think this is, a very good example that, if you do the right thing, you're in proper processes, you plan yourself well, you're in a good situation. And now basically our big challenge is, how can we add capacity as fast as possible? Because we're having, there's a Black Friday coming up in 4 months. And basically there's no capacity left on the market. So who's going to add capacity quicker than the rest of the market is going to win?
Well, that's kind of a follow-on question I have for you, because I mean, I think even pre-COVID, you had this whole increased demand, people expecting faster, cheaper deliveries. And that has been exacerbated in some ways by COVID, although people are a little more understanding that things are going to take longer to get because some things are harder. Supply chain has just slowed down in certain areas. And so, how are you, from Loggi's perspective, kind of making that equation work for shippers, carriers, the end customer, balancing all those pieces out together with that increased demand, trying to find supply for it? How do you balance that out? I imagine it's a big data and analytical piece to it, but how do you guys think about it, especially if you're in an operating role here? How do you make that operation work?
So first of all, the very good thing about technology is that it enables you to be much more flexible. So not to lead with like very strict procedures that can be very inflexible and sometimes. So technology enables you to be very flexible. So for example, we do our last mile in very small urban mini hubs. We can open one basically in a week's time. Then our cross-docking capacity can be it's somewhat scalable reasonably quickly in a few weeks matter. So the big thing technology enables you is basically be much more flexible to adjust basically your offering. Then on the second side is you're able to basically track what you do much more effectively, answer much more quickly to change in forecast, change in volumes, address issues much faster. So that what's the whole market as a whole in logistics in Brazil, the service level that we track of the market as a whole has worsened quite a lot. Our service level has been basically maintained on a very high level. And the last thing, technology enables you always to optimize route, to do all the load balancing, to make sure that you always have a trade-off in logistics, whereby typically you wait to add up to consolidate as much as you possibly can, so that you have the lowest unit cost when you deliver. But basically, there's a point in which basically the marginal cost of that waiting trade-off starts to be negative. But if you don't have technology, you don't know where it is. Basically, it becomes very difficult on a real-time matter to make the right decision. So that enables us, for example, with increasing volume, basically to free up capacity much quicker than a more traditional, wait and consolidate 100% model, basically.
So I'm going to ask a couple more questions because we're going to run out of time shortly, and we were a little bit over. So I apologize. I think I started the session late. So, but Hannah, let me talk about looking forward. As you said, let's not look back. Let's look forward. What technologies do you think are going to be interesting in the future in logistics? I mentioned some that I thought people have talked about. From your perspective, people have talked about blockchain or other things. What do you think is realistic in this sector that will really make a major impact?
So again, I'm trying to look beyond just logistics and looking at the entire supply chain.
Yep.
And so the last 10 years, we've been very focused on transparency and getting data and getting relatively clean data and getting them real time. That is still a concern, right? And I think that's going to continue. The entire transparency and ability to react fast, as Greg was saying, and use the technology to create real-time visibility. But then I as I said, I think a lot is happening on the demand side, a lot of demand sensing. So my bet is on quite a bit of AI functionality, ability to weed out the information data from big fields of data. You were talking about big data management, and of course that's really where AI comes in. And also the entire collaboration, supplier collaboration, regulatory environment. The regulatory environment is getting more and more complex, and not just with border crossings, but border crossings is certainly a key element in it, but in all types of compliance, environmental compliance, labor compliance, trucking our compliance, lots of different compliance issues. And that collaboration, which really needs government input and support also, I see as a big new area coming up over the next 10 years. Can blockchain be a solution in that? Possibly. You have the collaboration between the different people in the supply, entities in the supply chain. Right now, I wouldn't invest my money in supply chain because I think it's still in very, very early stages and not yet in a useful format. I leave it to Maersk and IBM and a couple of other big guys to play around with it once it, because I think that in the bigger scope of things, blockchain will only be valuable when more people adopt it. Mm-hmm. And so when the government starts adopting it, when others start adopting it, then I would say as a private company, I would be really interested in going in and adopting it. Right now, people are playing around with it, and it's still, in a way, a technology in search of a problem, right? Or maybe in search of people who will sponsor it. So my bet is on AI, big data, making sense of big data, continuing the transparency, demand sensing, and then I'm still very hard on IoT. I think that we've just scratched the surface on IoT, and both seen from a consumer sales standpoint and also seen from an optimization and supply chain standpoint.
Great. And Greg, I'll ask you a somewhat similar question, and I'll merge my question with Andy Sal from Silicon Valley Bank, who asked us a question over Facebook. It's clear I've done way too many panels with him because I'm thinking of the same questions as him now. But if you look at advanced technologies, drones that Amazon has talked about, and self-driving trucks, things like that. We'll talk about self-driving trucks with Fede and Eddie shortly, but are there technologies like that you could think could leapfrog in a place like Brazil even faster than countries like the US? And where do you think technology, what's the next evolution of technology kind of in your space?
So to start with, I think the drone question, so drones, for example, can make a lot of sense, in Brazil for very low density areas. In Brazil, you have a big challenge tackling, very rural space, in the north and center west part of Brazil, where you have huge farms and very low density areas, or even in the Amazon. So it's very similar in terms of use case as you could have in Africa, for example. We don't really think that drone is really an option in very high density urban spaces, simply because it's very complex to lead with drones. It's low capacity compared to driving a truck and delivering like 100 parcels to an address. And at the end of the day, the flexibility of a delivery courier is huge, and you don't get that for a drone. So we think drone has big opportunities for very low density spaces, but that is where we would expect it. We would be very excited about self-driving trucks, for example. we think it's a huge opportunity to reduce costs, to improve road safety, which is something relevant in Brazil. I think the main challenge is more regulatory in Brazil. Simply, bringing this type of technology has huge, tax hurdles and regulatory hurdles in Brazil. And I'm not sure the country is evolving faster on that. I think what has huge opportunities is much more AI-driven technology. So where you only lead with internal data, and there the space is huge. So routing algorithm, basically all the security-based algorithm. I believe emerging market in Brazil is very advanced on that, as is China, by the way. And this is where I think most of the innovation will come from, because you don't depend on regulation, or not too much. Really, you really depend on the brain power of people, and not any physical asset, which is hard to get by.
So, and if I may, I also want to add that, of course, in the manufacturing space itself, there are other technologies that I really see evolve. And the one that maybe impacts the supply chain the most is 3D printing. Right. So I really see distributed printing of spare parts and organs and a lot of other things happening right now, and we are just getting to the situation where this is going to have a major impact on the supply chains, and really also seen from a sustainability standpoint have a serious impact.
Absolutely. Well, I think we're out of time for our panel. There were a couple of questions on the Zoom webinar chat. Greg, I think there's one there for you. I saw, Hannah, you already responded to one, so thank you. I apologize we couldn't get to more of the questions, but first of all, I want to thank both of you, Hannah and Greg. Thank you so much for your time, for spending the time with us, for giving us your thoughts and ideas on the space. And I think we could go on for much more time, but I really appreciate your time today.
Well, thank you very much, Antoine. Thank you, Anna. All right.
And I think, Margarise, we'll move on to our next panel then, I guess, with Eddie and Fede.
Yeah.
Hey guys, how are you?
Fede, you're on mute. I'm good. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you guys for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Hey, Eddie. Hey, Anton.
I will give a brief background just so everyone knows. In full disclosure, Eddie and Fede have worked together for a number of years now, so know each other quite well. And we are also investors in CargoX, which is Fede's company. So just to fully disclose that up front. But so I'll introduce Eddie when he comes back. Was a CEO of Anthym Logistics. Anthym is a third-party logistics company that provides truckload, less than truckload, intermodal, and managed transportation services. That was sold to Bluegrace Logistics, which he's now an advisor to. He's also an advisor to Autobahn AI, as well as a partner at Woodlawn Partners. Previously, Eddie was the COO of Coyote Logistics, which is a Chicago-based third-party logistic company, which was sold to UPS. Eddie oversaw 10 areas with over 1,000 companies in this fast-growing company. He was responsible for enterprise and BD operations, carrier procurement, LTL, intermodal, and services call center. He joined the company in July of 2010 and helped grow the company from 250 people and 200 million in revenue to 2,200 people and 2 billion in revenue at the end of 2014. Prior to Coyote, Eddie had extensive experience in the logistics space as well. So thank you so much, Eddie, for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, and congratulations to 10 years for BayBrazil, and I'm learning all about it. And thank you for my opportunity to talk about the future of logistics. It's never a subject I don't enjoy talking about.
We'll get you more involved as time goes on, for sure, in BayBrazil.
Thank you, Margarise.
Fede is an entrepreneur in the logistics space, having founded CargoX, the largest freight marketplace in LATAM, matching truck drivers and carriers and millions of loads of cargo. CargoX lowers transportation costs for shippers while boosting income for truck drivers, which rarely travel empty, and we reduce carbon dioxide emissions as a result. The company went from a small operation run from a Starbucks coffee shop in 2013 to connecting over 75% of all trucks in Brazil with loads and generating over 20 billion in transaction per year. Before CargoX, Fede worked at JP Morgan in London. So thank you, Fede, for joining us as always.
Thanks for the invite. It's good to share the live with you and Eddie.
So I've got a lot of questions to ask, but first of all, as I said, and as I did in the last panel, I'd love to have both of you just, I've given a very short snippet of your backgrounds, but would love for you to kind of talk a little bit more about what you've done and kind of what you see in the space. So Eddie, if you want to start.
Sure. Well, I think you captured my background pretty good. I have a pretty diverse background in logistics, from working on the private equity side to operating, from startup, I always like to say, from mailroom to boardroom and back. I was fortunate enough to meet Fede, I think maybe in a Starbucks, and get involved with learning the Brazilian freight market and watching his incredibly great team build a load board company into a freight brokerage company, and really learn to interact with a number of different types of businesses in the Brazilian market. I think I've been there 10 times. It's been fascinating. I know one word, which is obrigada, and I apologize. I'm working on my language skills. They're not going well, but I have 30 years of logistics experience. I actually am a partner in a PE firm that owns a trucking and warehouse company. I advise a autonomous vehicle / assisted driver vehicle company called Autobahn AI, and as well as work with Fede and my current advisory role with Bluegrace, who purchased Anthym Logistics back in February. And so my background's pretty much as you sort of defined it, but I have a lot of different hats that I've worn and places that I've seen. And over the 30 years, I like to tell people, I think when I first met Fede, I said, I'm a freightaholic, welcome to the club. Once you're in it, sort of just in your blood, you can't really get out of it. So happy to answer any questions and tell you what I see as the future. But the future looks bright. There's, logistics is not going away, and there's a tremendous amount of opportunities that still remain. And I certainly think that one of the challenges that doesn't get talked a lot about, that I'll just share quickly before I turn it over to Fede, is, I've often told people that the logistics departments of buyers of freight services is kind of the warehouse or back office for most companies. And it's the cost of doing business sector of their business. And as a result of that, it is typically the tail of the dog. And I don't mean that in a derogatory manner, but it doesn't lead the innovation level of forward thinking. So it tends to be, as I like to say, you brought up the Brazilian, I think Fede and I talked about this a long time ago, but that, the smartphone, the tablet users in the Brazilian owner operator market, and how they really traditionally, took a longer period of time to get there. And they probably are using it more for social media, but it's growing and increasing in its usage in their day-to-day activities. But they probably still have an iPhone 8. And I don't, I'm joking when I say that, but in the sense that these are the last of the front integration levels. And in the US, I like to joke about the fact that you put a Nest, thermometer on your door, or doorbell on the front door of your house, but you don't put anything on your water heater. And so that's kind of logistics in a nutshell. So I think that will slow the pace of innovation down, and the adoption of some of the technology and advancements that are out there and available, but they are coming. And I think things like this pandemic and other things drive that innovation speed, but it will take longer than maybe it should.
That's very helpful. And we will definitely touch about the pandemic and how that's affecting things. Fede, why don't you give a little bit of background on what you're doing, and also, if you can also talk about, for those that don't understand the difference between kind of the marketplace, the load board, et cetera, talk about your different parts of the business also. I think it's important to understand as well.
Yeah, maybe I should explain it because not a lot of people know what's the difference between a load board and a broker, but maybe the best way to explain what we do is the opportunity that we saw in Brazil. So I used to spend a lot of time on the road across Latin America as a whole, because I liked to travel a lot by road, specifically by bicycle. And every time I will go into a truck stop, because it's a good place for you to spend time at when you are traveling, you have all the infrastructure, etc., and it's safe. You see that the truck stops are like shopping centers. On the one hand, you have the shops. Rather than shoes and clothes, you have a piece of paper in a window that shows you a load. So, I have 30 tons of beer from Sao Paulo to Rio de Janeiro. On the other side of the window, you have a transportation company or a carrier that go there, look at the load, and then they go in and they say, I do want to move this load, and they close the deal there. They get paid when they deliver the load, etc. In every single truck stop that I visit in Brazil and the rest of Latin America, every single shipper will say, Brazil is a mess. The market is too complex. These guys, I pay them a lot, and the level of quality of the service that they give me is very bad. They deliver the load late. If they don't steal it, just stay away from this industry. And then when I go talk to the carrier will say, it's really not fair. These guys don't pay us enough. And on the top of the shipper don't pay us enough. And on the top of that, after I deliver the freights on time, they don't pay me. They push the payment forward if they pay me. And when you start looking at why one side of the table is saying I'm paying too much, and the other side is saying like I received too little, who is getting the money in the middle? And when you look at deeper into the industry, you realize that 60% of the time, the carriers are running empty, because the trucking capacity that exists in Brazil, the big trucks, and the freight are not connected. These thousands of truck stops across the country are like, they are not connected between each other. So I remember when in 2013, when we met with Antoine, and you were asking a lot about data. Not a lot of people understood why I was hiring data scientists. I think we are like the first company that start hiring data scientists for the trucking industry. And this is a statistics industry, right? You have trucks that are running empty and you have loads. You need to like plug them on real time. And when you are able to say, carriers, you're going to be working, your trucks are going to be working 100% of the time rather than 40% of the time, and shippers, we are going to give you visibility on who is a good carrier and the bad carrier, and the same for the carrier, who is a shipper that pays on time and who doesn't. Then you build an online platform that enables the two parties to transact online with safely, and also to make the best use of the excess capacity. The truckers make more money, the shipper saves money, and we also save on CO2 emission, which is good for the ESG policy of the company and the markets. And that's what a load board does. The difference between a load board and a broker, in a way, is that some type of shippers, like say large corporations, that they are like, look, I have to move 1,000 trucks per day all over the country. So I don't want to go there and open shops at different truck stops. I don't want to do that. So I'm willing to pay someone to open a shop at the truck stop to find the carriers for me. Those shops that are opening business on the behalf of the large corporations are called brokers. They issue documentation, insurance, etc. And we said, if we are going to move the market online and add efficiency to the market, which is our mission, we have to do both. On the one hand, we build the platform. On the other hand, if you're a shipper that require us to manage documentation, insurance, etc., we can do that for you too. And that's what is called freight brokerage in the industry. We do both. In a way, if you want to take it to the consumer market, we are like Amazon for freight, if you want to call it that way, where you can have someone that is a platform that connects two parties, or is a platform that, in addition to connect two parties, can do warehousing, etc. So it's kind of an analogy that works to explain how we work.
Perfect. Thank you. I think that helps clarify for those of us who are not always in the logistics space every day, like the two of you. So Eddie, let me ask you a question. I mean, and I asked this a little bit in the last session, but I think it's at the top of everyone's mind, so it affects everyone differently in some ways. But the coronavirus pandemic has affected supply chains across the board, across the world, et cetera. Demand has shifted dramatically, and we talked about this in the last session, whereby even if you look at food, grocery stores need more, restaurants need less, et cetera. Safety concerns have forced changes in the way that kind of drivers and shippers work. How do you think that's affected your industry?
I think it's a little early to tell. I think that the effects of the current environment are very challenging to sort of see what the long-term changes will be in the supply chain in general. I mean, certainly in the United States, I would say that if our healthcare PPP supply chain doesn't change dramatically over this going forward, I would be shocked that, you know, clearly there is, you know, reasons for people to be prepared better for pandemics and situations than we were in the outsourcing of manufacturing of really important goods for, you know, safety and security. I think as it relates to food, you know, as you know, think about a large problem with the inflationary risks going on, which could be economically really damaging, are just the cost of packaging product, you know, for the consumer to buy individual versus buying in bulk. The transporting of that gets impacted to a certain degree, certainly with e-commerce and stay at home, but I don't know that we actually can truly gauge the long-term effects secularly of how this happens, because relatively speaking, one of the things that I think is the most important aspect of understanding the on-demand, stay-at-home, purchase e-commerce evolution is the cost associated with the transportation and delivery of those goods. Mm-hmm. If you were to look at UPS over the last 15 to 20 years, they do residential as a byproduct of their customer needs, not as a profitable driver of their business. B2B, where they can, and I think Greg said it so elegantly about drones and I've actually been working with a drone company that's a startup too. But they, you know, doing it remotely into the sort of regional or remote areas, the farm areas versus the metropolitan areas, density matters. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that gets lost with Amazon Prime or just in general, if you look at, and I joke about this with people all the time and they're fascinated, but I think the people listening will appreciate this. We spent the last, I'm going to call it 25 years working on making packaging so that you could squeeze as many pieces of anything into a truck that was 53 foot long in the United States to maximize the utilization of density and capacity. Within 5 years, we have eliminated that by shoving plastic sealed air and packaging into a box that Amazon ships to you with one item in the box the size of, you know, a shoebox. It's the most inefficient way of shipping product. Now, if you can get it close enough to do final mile, maybe it can be efficient enough. And if you can package it, you know, in a way that maybe 3D printers could actually package around something or something that's more efficient, which I think we're a ways off from, maybe you can get it to be a profitable solution. But right now, and I don't want to speak from pure knowledge, but it is assumed AWS pays for delivery and Prime is a huge revenue generator, but I don't think it's paying for the cost of that e-commerce solution. So we're getting it, you know, hooked on this idea of how this economy is going to work without paying for it. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to be a skeptic because we did that with Google search and it still seems to be working. So, you know, people would have said, you could search for free forever and ever and ever. I don't know that I would have believed that back in 1989, but, or 2001. So maybe it's possible, but it is a challenging thing to look forward to. So getting back to how is this going to impact it? I don't know if I have the answers to really pandemic change of supply chains, but I think those are things to think about. Can we really afford it? Will we be willing to pay for the services we're getting? Are we going to have inflationary risks that drive the economy into a different position? Certainly, I think there's going to be some repercussions economically from the downturn in the restaurants and the leisure and the hospitality industry and travel industry that are definitely going to be economic, you know, recessionary positions that we'll see how we bounce back from. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it's interesting. It's, I mean,
too tangentially, but
no, they're very interesting tangents. I hadn't thought about I think your point around the amount of wasted space there is in a box in Amazon when they ship you one product with a bunch of air in there. You're right. I mean, but I guess they also have only a certain number of SKUs of box sizes, right, that they use also. And so, you know, there's a limit there. No, it's interesting. And Fede, you know, how do you feel like CargoX has felt the effects of COVID? As I mentioned in my presentation, which I know you weren't able to watch, but there's huge fragmentation of trucking in Brazil, right? Are we going to see more consolidation, do you think? Or what's going to happen as a result?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting because when with Eddie, when we started the company, we used to discuss the difference between the US and Brazil. And Eddie used to explain the difference with the history of the US. So the US right now is like the evolution of Brazil in a way, but Brazil is evolving, jumping stages that the US went through. So and I'll give you an example. The truckers in the States log in on the internet for the first time with a computer. The truckers in Brazil, they never saw a computer. They never had an email. So when we designed the first version of our mobile app, we never asked for an email because the guys didn't know what an email was. They joined the internet because WhatsApp started enabling calls over the internet for free, which was much better than the Nextel radio that they used to use. But what's happened in Brazil compared to the States, that now, what I want to say with this is that the effect of the COVID in the States versus Brazil is completely different. In the States, the industry was already online for the most part of it, maybe using iPhone 8 rather than iPhone 10. But for us here, iPhone 8 is great, as an industry. But most of the industry here was offline. So I remember when we were raising money and we were justifying what we were going to do with the money a year ago, it was mainly like, what we are going to do is to deploy the money on moving the offline market online, because we already have almost 100% of the trucks online. The type of business model we have is this network effect business model where you have the winner takes it all and the second one is gone, it disappears. So you tend to scale very quickly, but your limit is a market that is online. So once we hit the roof on the online space, the next move was, now we will need to take our funds, go there to the truck stops and convince the truckers to move online, which is really expensive. And what's happening with the COVID is that kind of like the COVID did the job for us. It's like, and the COVID didn't convince you to do anything. I see the COVID like a guy with a gun that goes to a truck stop and puts a gun in the head of people and says, now you're gonna use the internet and you don't have a choice. So we saw the amount of carriers and shippers start transacting online to increase dramatically over the last 2 months, to the point that at the beginning, we didn't understand where the volume was coming from, and until we realized that people were just opening new accounts without any marketing. We just dropped our marketing to zero, and the amount of new accounts kept increasing as of today. So we are seeing a lot of, so on the one hand, you have the offline market moving online, which is great. On the other hand, you have no competition whatsoever because international players kind of like froze. So you have the head start to continue dominating the local market where you operate as a company. And I think it's not only in trucking, but everywhere. And then for us as a platform that as a core, we eliminate CO2 emissions on the 60% excess capacity of the trucks, is great because the ESG and now the COVID made that much more evident for everyone. So for clients, for employees, and even for investors, that ESG policy is important. So we are like, the market is becoming more and more aware of the importance of pollution. And one of the things that we do at the core of the company is eliminating excess trucking capacity, which means eliminating CO2 emissions. So yeah, that's the main effect. Obviously, we had a drop in volume, and now we are growing. We are like 50 to 60% compared to pre-COVID time. And this new volume is driven not by our skills, but because the market is moving online very quickly. Yeah.
As a corollary to that, so Fede, you talked about the brokerage, you talked about the load board, et cetera. You're kind of almost moving into also this platform model of offering value-added services as well. And this has been a winning model in China and India and so on. Can you comment on that strategy and where you see this going from your perspective?
Yeah, and it's a model that is also starting to pick up in the States. It's just a different market. I'm not going to go into the details of why in the States didn't pick up before, but yeah. So you have, for example, carriers. Let's go back to my example. You know, a carrier goes and pick up freight from a multinational company, and the company says, "I'm going to pay you 60 days, 90 days later," and the carrier says, "Fine. So I'm going to deliver the freight and I get paid 90 days later. But if you don't pay me in 90 days, I'm going to go bankrupt." And on the top of that, because the working capital is so much, I don't have enough room to go buy new trucks and grow. And when I go to the bank doesn't give me a credit because I'm too small and they don't understand what type of animal I am, as you know, as a small carrier. 98% of the trucks in Brazil belong to carriers with less than 5 trucks. So the fragmentation is massive. So we thought, well, if we have so many carriers, we have 90,000 carriers and 600,000 active trucks on the platform. So this is more than 50% of the whole Brazilian market, and 10,000 shippers active per month in the platform. So we thought, if we are seeing so many transactions in the platform, we are loading 80,000 trucks per day in the platform, we have enough data to understand which type of businesses we are operating with. And if a carrier is a carrier that tends to have the integrity to go and deliver what they promise, which is delivering the freight on time, and the shipper is someone that typically pays on time to the carriers, then we can interfere there and provide, for example, cheaper working capital, because we can create different financial structures where we can capture the capital in a cheaper way. And on the top of that, we can go, for example, this is something that we sell a lot of stuff in cheaper, but for example, we thought, let's see where the truckers are sleeping. And then we start mapping the geolocalization of the truckers, and all these bubbles start popping up in different regions of the country. And when we went to see where the concentration of bubbles were overnight, it turns out that they were at white flag truck stops or gas stations. A gas station without a brand. The good thing about a gas station that doesn't have a brand is that it's cheaper than Petrobras, for example. But the bad thing is that it's a black box. You don't know if it's a good quality gas or not, what you're getting. You don't know if the toilets, the bathroom is clean or not, etc. So we said, let's start mapping up which ones are the good ones and the bad gas stations. And then obviously with ratings from the truckers. And once we build that network, let's go there and do a negotiation of gas at the cheaper rates. And then you suddenly eliminate the bad thing of having a white flag petrol station. You do negotiate with the owner of the petrol station. So you lower the gas even, it was already lower than Petrobras, but you drop it even further. And then you can give that data to the truckers so they have a better, or to the carriers so they can save money. Those are the type of things that we are doing, and it's working well, especially in the COVID, during the COVID, where everyone needs to save money.
So Eddie, it seems like companies like CargoX, Coyote, et cetera, can really make an impact on the lives of drivers in a number of different ways. Are you seeing that in the US, or what are the ways that you think that kind of this professionalizing these services can really impact people's lives that are really involved in this?
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that the reality is that the broker of the past, and I think Fetty and I discussed this when he first started really building out the CargoX features, was a middleman that was just sort of trying to take, represent the customer and deliver, freight opportunities to a carrier. And today I think it's a much bigger value add solution for both sides. Enhancing the carrier's opportunity to minimize their empty miles traveled by finding freight easier, especially Brazil, because of how large that owner operator market is. In the US, it's small carriers, and there are a lot of owner operators, but small carriers represent, trucks with 5 to 20 trucks versus one, owner operator. When you're an owner operator, you're, everyone knows this, but you're doing everything. You're doing the books, you're doing the billing, you're doing and it's really difficult to run a business and be the driver and be the sales rep and really do the things that you need to do to survive and find ways to succeed. So I think the technology innovations that CargoX has brought to the marketplace, the value added solutions from, freight payment and truck stop evaluation other things that they're working on are tremendous value adds to the driver community. But in addition, what they offer is the shipping community a much easier way to get access to that in a way that's much more measured and sort of, you know, if you think about small restaurants and the effect that reviews or a company like Yelp in the United States would have had on just giving them a voice, giving them an opportunity to differentiate themselves. You know, small, mid-size, and even large shippers, it's very difficult to get access to fragmented capacity, especially owner-operators, and get any consistency of service, consistency of communication, consistency of technology. So the professionalization of the third-party logistics business from when I started in the early 90s to now, and I'm only, you know, 35 years old, so I was really young then. But but you know, ultimately, it's come so far, and it really, you know, reminds me of other, you know, transformational ways that people sort of think about the enhancements of what, you know, companies like Robinhood or Charles Schwab or E-Trade or, you know, did in the financial industry for, you know, relatively simple day trader or just individual, you know, consumer users. If you think about those types of technology enhancements that have been out there, you know, the eBay, what it did for the person trying to sell product to other people, you know, that was used goods or things of that nature, it's kind of a very similar transformation in the logistics industry. It's taken what was a pure old school brokerage methodology and turned it into a much more professionalized way of adding value and creating ways for people to interact and do business in a much more professionalized and valuable manner.
So Eddie, you've worked in both markets now, working with CargoX, but obviously have an enormous amount of experience here in the US. What do you see as the biggest differences in the two markets? Is it the data utilization? Is it the sophistication? It seems like Brazil is jumping past the US in certain things. How would you, for those of us who don't know the market as well as you do, what are the biggest kind of differences that you see in the two markets?
I think the biggest difference is probably the density centers in Brazil that are much dramatically more consumers than producers. If you look at the US map and you look at the population centers east of the Mississippi, there are a lot of large cities, maybe not New York, Chicago, Atlanta size, but large enough where they are consumption centers and the freight movement network is a little bit more diversified and a little bit more, I don't want to say, it has more patterns or abilities to try to find optimization or efficiencies, I would say easier than some of Brazil, where agriculture seems to happen in certain parts of the country. You have Sao Paulo and Brasilia, which are huge economic centers of consumption. You have this export marketplace and import. The patterns of freight and the lanes are different, are just lesser in Brazil. Now that may change over time also, but in the US, the reason it happened was because it's kind of ironic if you think about how population started on the East Coast with the 13 colonies and moved west. What you ultimately ended up happening was, as population centers got really dense, manufacturing moved out because it was too expensive, so it became shipping in. But some manufacturing and things stayed because they were too expensive to ship too long. So, you know, you have, or people just didn't want to move. And then you have like minerals and things you can't actually produce or get in other parts of the country that impact where those things, produce is where it's grown. So I think just generally that is the biggest difference. And whether that'll impact the outcome of, you know, the success rate of optimization and efficiency or not, I think still to be determined, but there's plenty of opportunity that we've talked about still with that 60% number as a huge, you know, even if you can carve out 30% of that, it's dramatic.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're going to run out of time shortly, but I don't know if there are any other questions from the audience. I haven't seen any on Zoom, and I don't know if there are any on Facebook right now. But I'm going to continue with my questions, and unless I hear otherwise. But so let me kind of go with a couple of questions in the future. So Fede, you've got a lot of data, and as you said, you were one of the first, or you were the first in the logistics space to hire data scientists in Brazil. With this amount of data that you're collecting and so on, how do you think about this human-driven trucks to autonomous vehicle kind of transition? Do you think this will happen in Brazil? What's your time frame and when you think it will happen in Brazil?
So I think the first thing is, I'm sure that the first thing that we are going to see are electric trucks. The first electric trucks, they are going to be delivered in the States by the end of 2022. That's the deployment dates that Nicola, Hylon have. That's the deadline. And we believe that for Brazil, it's going to be 1 year after. So we may have some pilots, electric trucks, coming to Brazil by the end of 2022. But then the deployment of the trucks are going to happen in 2023. Obviously, there are a lot of regulations that need to be changed. But because the ESG, the environmental issue is becoming so relevant right now, I believe that the markets are going to adapt very quickly. This is in the best interest of governments. It's in the best interest of shippers because of the environmental issue, but also because it's gonna bring a lot of economy. The cost of moving an electric truck is much cheaper than moving a gas truck. And also in Brazil, we have all these mountains. So, you know, with the powertrain of the electric trucks, when you are braking or you're going down a mountain, you are actually recharging the batteries. And then autonomous trucks is there. I don't see a reason why they should not come, other than the technology is very expensive right now, but the technology is going to become cheaper sooner than later. Tesla announced that they're about to achieve level 5 automation. So if you can put a car with like a car that is fully autonomous inside a city, and we used to talk about this with Eddie when you got your Tesla, and you were saying like, yeah, it's almost okay, but still, you know, it's not able to self-drive in the city. But if Tesla achieve level 5 this year, as they promised, then if you can put a car inside the city to drive itself, then I don't see a reason why you cannot put a large truck on a highway, which is where the large truck operates most of the time. Maybe you need a human to drive the truck into a warehouse and out of the warehouse, but that's like 0.01% of the time that the truck is on the road. Most of the time it's on the highway. So yeah, we can see the combination.
No, there's an argument that autonomous trucking is much more manageable than any other kind of autonomous driving out there, right? So again, as you said, they're mainly driving on highways for most of the time. A lot of the highways are straight or, you know, lines, but with the ability to kind of stay in your lane sort of situation and not have to deal with a lot of pedestrians or other sort of situations. So
yeah, I'll give you some. I mean, I think the likelihood is that autonomous vehicle usage on trucks has a lot longer to go from a regulatory and an insurance standpoint than it probably does from a technology standpoint, for sure. Yeah. Number one. Number two, I think the way I view it is kind of, you know, if you think about, there's a couple different reasons I'm skeptical and optimistic at the same time. I'm skeptical because of the Boeing 737 MAX story. You know, autopilot has been available, but we still have pilots in planes. And yes, we're transporting passengers and the risk factor is very great, but an 80,000-pound vehicle on the road is something that people will fear without a person in the seat. And so public safety is one of the issues that I think people have to get really, really comfortable with. The other thing is smart vehicles really rely on other smart vehicles. And no offense to mankind, we are not the smart vehicle. And therefore, if you think about the average age of the vehicles on the road, it's going to take 15 years to upgrade everybody to that technology. So how well does it operate? You know, and it has to be at 99.9% accuracy to be acceptable for cars. So I think there's a very large barrier. I do think that we can make. I do think we can. Go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you, based on that, you said it's more of a regulatory in some ways than it is technology question. Do you think then that there will be markets that could, that they could launch in earlier? For example, you could argue the US is very kind of consumer safety focused first in some ways. Do you think other markets would allow it before the US, for example? Could you see it in China, for example?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think people who ultimately, let me just, what I was going to say is the way I envision this longer term is literally airport to airport. If you think about how air freight moves, right? The planes move it from airport to airport, and then it gets unloaded, transloaded, trucked, and delivered. If airport to airport was done with an autopilot, no one would know, right? Because no one would care. It's cargo. So if that could be done today, which I think it should be done, the way I see it is sort of, you know, city center to city center may not happen, but city, you know, highway point to highway point, and then a stopping location, whether it be a truck stop or a visitor center or someplace where the truck pulls off and waits, then a driver comes and picks up that truck and drives it. That I see happening sooner. It doesn't require the elimination of all the jobs, which will be a government problem for a lot of people. And to your point, do I think other countries will adopt that much faster? Absolutely. I think that's coming.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Margarise, I know we're a little over time. I think I have a couple more questions here, but I can stop it now if from a time perspective.
Yeah, we have a question from Gustavo Goldenberg.
Yeah, I see that. It's for Fede. It's, I think I'm going to get this right. How do you compare long haul FTL with larger than parcel LTL last mile? Can you bring the same innovation to this market?
Yeah, it's not an easy answer to that. We focus on full truckloads. We don't do first mile, last mile, or we don't go into LTL. I believe that it's better to focus in one industry, one market, and dominate it before you go elsewhere. The technologies are the opportunities are different. The competition landscape is different in Brazil. I think there are two complete different markets. The type of innovation and investments that you need are different. So the guys from Loggi, they focus more on the LTL, last mile markets. So yeah, they are different markets. I believe they are complete different type of animals.
Okay. Any last thoughts from both of you? I think we'll wrap it up here, but any last thoughts that both of you have on kind of logistics space that you want to kind of impart?
Yeah, I think just generally speaking, the opportunities are tremendous, and I think it's exciting times in logistics, and I think it's great to see companies like, you know, innovationally change and transform and try to professionalize the industry. And I think CargoX and several of your other parties that you're involved with and Valor is involved with are great innovators and great transformational people and companies to help bring us to the next phase.
Thanks, Eddie. And at some point we'll have to talk more about your drone work and where you see that going, because I think that's another interesting topic.
That is another one.
That's another whole nother topic.
Let's do it.
Fede, anything else from you, from your perspective?
No, I think, yeah, I think it's a very exciting time to be in logistics. I think road transportation is becoming something that we didn't speak about, is that, yeah, road transportation is becoming more important than before, because I think air transportation is about to get more expensive. And in Brazil, we don't have many other methods of transportation. Taking out minerals, 90% of the economy is moved by trucks. This is the third largest trucking market in the world after US and China. So it's exciting. The market is coming online, is adapting technologies very quickly. And I think the transformation over the next 12 to 24 months is going to be massive.
Well, Fede and Eddie, thank you so much for your time again. I really appreciate it. Thanks for all your wisdom and knowledge again. And Margarise, over to you.
And I echo that. Thank you so much. Congrats on your leadership, Fede and Ed. Thank you so much for educating us on this very complex sector. Muito obrigada.
Obrigado.
And for Oh, no, I have actually just one last question. If you all can tell us where are you joining us from? Fed.
I'm in Sao Paulo.
Eddie.
I'm in Chicago area, the Chicago suburbs of the United States.
Antoine.
I'm in the Bay Area. So I'm in Menlo Park.
Wonderful to have all of you here with us, and also our previous panel. This conversation will be available in our YouTube channel. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you, Antoine. For those who got this conversation in the middle on Facebook, I want to again talk about Antoine and how he's been very helpful to our team, and just say a few more words about him. So Antoine is partner at Valor Capital Group, a cross-border venture funding, bringing the US, Brazil, and global technology markets together. Prior to joining Valor, Antoine was at Google for 9 years, serving a wide range of capacities. He was most recently COO of Global Partnerships. It's such a pleasure to have you back, Antoine. Thank you so much for all the time you put in to help us to build this panel in this session.
Anytime,
Thank you,
Margarise.
Eddie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fed. Ciao. Thank you, everybody.
Obrigado. Tchau, tchau.